All right, I thought I would talk about utopianism and the flawed and fallen world politics of the left and the right, respectively. It's only going to be a short video because I wrote something down that's central to this, but it'll explain why left and right can point to each other and say that's an internal contradiction or paradoxical or makes no sense in regards to each other to some extent, and why the left are midwits, which is to say about 105 to 115 IQ on average, but the right is like everyone 125 IQ or higher, more or less, or like 100 IQ, or like 80 to 100 IQ. I've explained before that autism bumps one's IQ up on average a little bit. Apparently, the bell curve says people with autism are about 3 IQ points on average smarter. But autism is a very crapshoot sort of like gamble with IQ. Like you can be extra low IQ or you could be like extra high IQ with autism. It's more disproportionately towards the extremes than non-autistic people's intelligence. But it does take all kinds to make the world go round. I'm just talking statistical averages of the autism versus non-autistic groups. Now, I'll just say what I wrote, and then I'll get into some of the details to explain what I mean a little bit, and then that'll be the video. So basically, what I have to say is, the fallen world, flawed people, as opposed to perfect world, best vision for reality. The best vision you can imagine, as Carl Jung would say, enlightenment does not come from imagining figures of light, it comes from illuminating the darkness. But of course, you must know light from dark before you can actually do that. So you have to have a proper axiom of right moral baseline. And the pie in the sky stuff, the my perfect world imagination, doesn't have that sort of what the right wing calls based or foundational or grounded sort of layer to support the pie in the sky skyhook utopia vision. Which is why the perfect is the enemy of the good in humans. But God is perfect and He's good. And good is good in humans. And why they say Jesus Christ, who is God, the Son of God, is perfect so we can be good. As a reference to the light versus dark basic morality in some sense. And one can argue it's axiomatic or just a presupposition or like a foundational principle that you don't have a substructure beneath, right? The assumption of it. But the thing with axioms or presuppositions is that you can try them out and see how they actually operate. You can experiment with them and see the results. And the most common experience is that following Jesus Christ and the Bible leads to you to being a better person than you otherwise would be. It's not always the case necessarily, but it's mostly the case. And a lot of the case when it's not happening and you're a Christian, it's because you're bringing the wrong presuppositions about Christ, saying you're following Him, and then not actually unpacking the hidden meaning of the Bible as you grow older, or you're not internalizing the aspects of it, and so on. It's a very good guide, but it's more than just a strict rule book. It's also a training tech. It's a training program for how to think. And now this is sort of how cults might operate in some cases, or totalitarian institutions or movements can operate. So it's not exactly necessarily totally different from them in every pathway, in every structure of it, but there is a fundamental difference to it, which is it's actually grounded in reality on some level, regardless of what the left calls the Sky Daddy problem. Right? And basically, there's 5 layers of possibility for good and evil. There's perfect good, mostly good, about 50-50, mostly bad, and pure evil. What the Bible does is it says God is pure good and Satan is pure evil, and humans are either mostly good, 50-50, or mostly bad. And then what the left objects to, the atheist secularists object to, is that it says if you're not mostly good, you're cut off. Now, I can understand why someone would object to the severity of such a statement, but basically, I sympathize personally. This isn't a common, or it's not a doctrine or a dogma of Christianity, but it's a sort of like personal doctrine or dogma that I can sympathize with someone who's mostly good, but not on board with Christianity quite, but has its general culture and civilizational values embedded through the history of the West. So they're not a practicing Christian who says officially, I believe in Jesus Christ as God the Son of God, and God at the same time. But you have the underlying substructures of Christianity as evidenced through the West's moral value systems. It's not pagan, it's not Muslim, it's not Hindu, it's not Shinto, it's not Buddhist, it's not Voodoo, it's not Aztec, it's Christian. Even without necessarily believing in Jesus Christ officially, you can have these artifacts of Christianity in your upbringing and value system that you adhere to, so you practice life like a Christian in many ways without officially declaring your loyalty to Jesus Christ. And my personal belief is that if you're doing that, God will accept you. So you don't have to just say, I officially believe in Jesus Christ, and then act like a Muslim. You don't do that. And you don't say, I believe in Muhammad, and then act like a Muslim and then go to heaven. You go to hell. Because Islam is satanic. But if you say, I don't believe in Jesus Christ, but you act like a Christian because you have the training of a Christian, then you are aligned on many moral principles of a Christian already, and you accept them. You just don't have the metaphysical grounding for it quite as much as a Christian does. But the whole God thing is more of an arch's capstone, which I've explained earlier in a different video before. It's not the pillar itself of your morals. It's the piece that's between two pillars that are meeting in the middle that prevents them from collapsing when it's an archway. So you can still have values and character as your twin pillars, but you can't make the archway without God. And an archway is more functional than two pillars are, is my argument for it in some sense. Now, this is not to say that someone who's not officially a Christian but has the two pillars of character and values couldn't be hypothetically better quality as a person than someone with the capstone. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying they wouldn't be better necessarily, but they're not as good as they could potentially be, is what I'm saying. So basically, the Christian direction of your value system, coupled with character, makes you mostly good. And you're your best self when you're also officially a Christian. Because you buy into the program that Christianity provides for your maximum growth as an individual. And my belief is people who are already in that direction but just don't see God in the universe will actually be rewarded by seeing God and going, oh, I was wrong about that, but mostly vindicated. So I would include those people in the saved, personally. But, and the people that say they believe in Jesus but act like a Muslim will go to hell. On average. But even then, like if you're just naturally a very sort of kind of person, then if you're a Christian, then you're doing your best, then you'll still go to heaven too. So it's like you have to be pretty hypocritical as a Christian. And I don't mean hypocritical the way the left says it about Christians. I mean in the way Christians say it about Christians. Because that's a genuine character flaw, not an imagined character flaw. Okay, so this isn't part of what I wrote. Like, what I've said so far is not part of what I wrote. But I'll read what I actually wrote, and you'll understand why utopianism doesn't work, and flawed, fallen world, imperfect, good and bad, not perfect or worst, is necessary thinking, but also why you actually have to watch out for the internal contradictions of your worldview and actually test and experiment with the presuppositions and axioms to find the right worldview for actual good society. And that's one of those things we actually have to do, and so on. And keep in mind what I said about the midwits and the very smart people and the sort of average to dumber people slightly, and so on. But this is, and like basically what the midwits do is they latch on to this, but they don't extend their thoughts on it to the full length. And also, this is partly a sign of immaturity as opposed to maturity. when you've got the IQ potential, but you haven't realized it fully yet. So this is the big brain, high IQ, sort of like mature 130 to 140 IQ subgenius INTP sort of analysis of the situation that I'm going to give here. Because that's what I am, basically. It's not just me empty bragging. It's like me saying, look, I've got the credentials mentally. But I'll let it speak for itself anyways, on top of me advertising it through my credentials, essentially. Okay, so what I have to say is, the fun thing about intelligence is you will get less paradoxes in your analysis, but any limited system of reference, which is the only thing we have as humans, will inevitably, fundamentally have some sorts of paradoxes. And the higher IQ you are, the less you're able to tolerate their existence, so you go harder against them, which simultaneously allows better explanations, but drives people up the wall when they hit the hard limits. This is why politics is so full of whataboutism. Then the only question is, which paradoxes have the least negative impact on concrete living standards, and which system has the least harmful and least number of them, or least unfair ones, in the direct moment. So I'm not talking about silence is violence or speech is violence and then shooting Charlie Kirk being good or bad. I'm not saying it's good, I'm saying it's bad. And then simultaneously I'm saying not executing a terrorist is bad, not good. So one's obviously in the moment and at face value obviously good, and one's obviously bad, essentially. Charlie Kirk's murder is bad. Executing a terrorist is good. It's commonsensical, right? Like, you want as little of the contradictions in your belief system that lead to shooting Charlie Kirk or letting off terrorists who murder lots of people without punishment. Coincidentally, though, this existence of limitation and inevitable paradox, because of limitation, is why utopianism fails. Because only the infinite or infinity can resolve all paradoxes. And that is why the fallen and flawed world, least bad, a good system is necessary, and the perfect is the enemy of the good within human relations. And that's why we don't want perfectionism or anything like that to run society. Now, I'm not saying we don't want good effort or to self-improvement, but I am saying being perfectionist about things or not accepting something because it's flawed but good, I'm not saying doing that is a good thing. I'm saying it is good to have good but flawed things because we, as mere mortals, cannot attain perfection. And paradoxes will exist that anyone can point out eventually in any given system. The only question, therefore, is which paradoxes are the least harmful in concrete living conditions or have the least negative impact on obvious fairness in the moment. And I mean like in the direct situation, maybe not like literally autistically, 1 second from now, but like, you know what I mean, like that sort of like murderers should be executed, people who make a bad joke or insult people should not be murdered. Basic commonsensical stuff like that Whatever system that has the least negative impacts on that principle and the least harmful individually of those paradoxes is the system we need to follow. No system is perfect, but only some systems are good, and some systems are better than others. So we have the existence of perfect good and perfect evil, but the human systems can only be mostly bad, neutral-ish, or 50-50, and mostly good. And we let God be perfect and the devil be evil, essentially. Pure evil and pure perfect. Pure good and pure evil. And no matter how smart you are as a human, you will never get the perfect system no matter how hard you try. It's fundamentally impossible. It's part of the very existence of limitation itself, which no human can transcend. So no matter how perfect you imagine something, it will never actually be perfect. There's always going to be something to it that fails on some level. And then you want the least amount of failures and the least harmful failures. And that's a matter of personal values, judgment, and character, and what's relative to you as an individual. But intelligence gives potential, not necessarily the realization of potential, to the ability to discern what system does that the most accurately. That's why genuine curiosity and humility and being as truth-telling as possible and focus on the truth is so important, because someone with 100 IQ who does those things is actually wiser, not necessarily smarter, but they're wiser than someone with a 140 IQ who does not do those things. Pride blinds you from the truth, even if you want the truth, and you also need the truth, so you need to want the truth and not be prideful. Which is why the automatic assumption of I'm smarter than you, I should rule over your life, doesn't work in some fashion. The automatic assumption doesn't. But individuals who are better realized in the wisdom domain because they're humble and truthful can, in fact, make an offer, in some sense, that they should run the bigger picture things better than those who automatically assume smarts equals wisdom. Because there's a lot of higher IQ people who are dysfunctional in day-to-day or business or whatever projects they have than 100 IQ people. You know, you don't want a mad genius running an operation. You want a stable, gifted, not quite genius to run it. The mad genius might be brilliant in his domain and be good at what he does when he's actually good, like the best, but he's not good for other parts of it. So he's a specialist, is often what happens with higher IQ people in some sense. They become specialists in a sense for their best work. But that's normal for a lot of people. Lots of people have strengths and weaknesses at certain things, and so on. But also, you want to think it's also about those who cannot do teach. That's another wisdom in some sense. And it's simultaneously an expression of you can't actually pull it off, so you teach other people to do it, the principles of it, in hopes they'll do it for you. Now, either you're teaching the principles because that's all you can grasp, but you don't understand the principles, or you do understand the principles. And again, that's a matter of lower smarts versus higher smarts, or at least something like that. When you're smart, you have a higher potential for wisdom, but you have to be humble and truth-seeking and take your time to actually reach your potential. And when you reach your potential, you're more able to do the thing, not just teach the thing. However, that it's like I said, it's also true that even if you know how to teach the thing so other people actually can do it with what you've taught them, you might have a fundamental personality aspect that prevents you from being a particular doer at things in general. And that's what I found as an INTP, right? They're not necessarily known as people who do things themselves, but they are good teachers at things. But part of wisdom is knowing your limitations. Like, I can play video games fairly well, but I can't run a business. I get overwhelmed by the tasks of maintaining like a gas station as a gas station clerk or attendant or gas jockey. I can barely do yard work and newspaper delivery while also doing high-level geopolitical analysis or something, or metaphysical analysis, or easily mastering video games with their conceptual rule sets in an abstract way, which is how I can play video games well. But the actual doer part of things, other than playing video games, are really basic sort of memorization routine stuff, is difficult. While the high-level conceptual framework of complex stuff is actually relatively easy for me in some fashion. The best way to look at it is, are you a chieftain or a shaman or a warrior or a craftsman or a farmer / hunter, or a hunter rather, or a cook or an artist or a musician or a diplomat or argument person, right? Like, there's all sorts of little different tasks you can be part of. And I just gave a few of them. Or are you a teacher of the tribe's younger generations? Yeah. And the reason why teaching works, even if you're not a doer, is the doers often naturally come to certain assumptions about how the world works and can think towards action in ways that the teacher cannot. But the principles the teacher learns are the things that don't necessarily come easily to the people who know how to do the actions. But both are necessary for mastery in some sense. At least pretty often. So the the guy who can act easily automatically discerns and picks up on technical skills at the ground level, while the teacher learns the high level, subtle tricks and nuances that are like after you learn the basics. Now that's a very limited fashion of development for the teacher and the actor in some sense. It leads to a lot of dysfunction in the teacher and the actor and the student people, the learners who act. There's a disconnect. A teacher has to learn the basics most often to tell the learning person, who's generally an actor, the ins and outs of why the advanced stuff is advanced and the basic stuff is basic. So certain things that are conceptual lend themselves towards INTP teaching and mastery and knowledge, because INTPs are very conceptual. They're meta, not foundation. And that's also why I have difficulty with anything tougher than yard work or newspaper delivery for business stuff. Whereas someone who's an ENTJ or an ESTJ or an ISTJ or an ISTP can understand the ground level and the advanced stuff for action. But they're not as mastery based in the conceptual ground, the conceptual level of the advanced theory and principles and so on. So what you see is an INTP and an INTJ or an ENTJ or an INFJ. INTJ for the conceptual plan. Like an INTJ is conceptual but can plan for specifics and do contingencies, but plan out to the very end. An INTP plans in the moment, but has a wider repertoire of concepts and tricks. An ENTJ is more details focused as well, but more relatable to people, but not as far reaching in their plans. And they don't have as many conceptual tricks as the INTP for developing things in the moment. And the INFJ is more people vibes based and action based than the INTP, which is why the INTP, who's conceptual and logical, matches with INFJ, who's vibes and people based, and they both intrigue each other and I don't know about confuse exactly, but they sort of vibe off each other as completing each other, which is why they're the golden pair in some sense, because they're filling in each other's weaknesses, but they're both similar somewhat. They're both introverts, and they're both intuitive. But the INFJ is feeling and judging, which is people and action. And the INTP is thinking or concepts and perceiving, which is analysis or structured frameworks development, or like noticing little things and teaching and so on. Whereas the INFJ is very social. And so the INTP handles the concepts and the world, and the INFJ handles the action, the doing, and the people. The INTP understands the laws of nature. The INFJ understands the laws of people. And the ENTJ understands people towards a goal and the little details of daily activity as like a project manager and being a team leader and assigning people their strengths and positions. And the INTJ figures out the perfect plan to get where you want to be from where you are, with all the stuff the INTP brings them for information and concepts and frameworks and little tidbits that could be relevant from the beginning to the end, a total perfect plan. Anyways, this Myers-Briggs type indicator stuff, for the most part, is very focused on my own reflections and relations with people and my experiences with them. It's a very INTP relations focused part of this video, basically. But if you're an INTP, then this will explain to you why those other types are important and so on. And they're probably who you gel with the most: INFJs, ENTJs, and INTJs. But the INTP has to be aware that they are conceptual, not action-oriented or mechanical-oriented. And basically, like I said before, in one video at least, an INTP can turn chaos into a complex problem. An INTJ can take complex and turn it into a complicated problem. And the INFJ or the ENTJ, probably the ENTJ more so, can turn a complicated problem into a simple solution or direction. And that's for the structure and worldview kind of stuff. Whereas the INFJ runs the whole program of chaos to complex to complicated to simple solution in their own heads for the people part of things. But for the world and relations to nature, natural laws and systems, INTP chaos to complex, INTJ complex to complicated, and ENTJ complicated to simple solution. And the ENTJ can reach into complex a little bit, and the INTP can reach into complicated from complex a little bit. So if you have an INTP and an ENTJ, they're going to work fairly well together for getting things done. Or an INTP and an INFJ. But the INTJ and INTP are more of a theoretical or conceptual power duo for the advanced thoughts or thinking and getting a plan worked out. But anyways, this is why an INTP has to be humble about their limitations, because they're teachers, not doers. But it's important to learn how to do the basics so that your advanced mind and conceptual frameworks have something to latch onto, which is why INTPs need a lot of life experience and forcing to deal with basic living issues for them to not be totally absent-minded professors, but rather grounded, genius-level advisors. And if they do teach, then because they were forced to learn the basics, their advanced conceptual frameworks that come naturally actually meet with the basic level of understanding, so that it's coherent and you have a full framework from beginning to end, basic to advanced to master to grandmaster, for the INTP to bring people through the entire process, or at least from the beginning to as far near the end, or from the beginning to as far as they can go as they are. From beginning to the end of that individual's development, even if it's not quite up to the level of the INTP, and so on. So basically, an INTP needs to learn the basics of things, and then they can learn the advanced stuff really easily, intuitively. But if they don't learn the basics, then their advanced thinking is just smoke and mirrors, and so on. And basically what I have to say about this is, basically the reason why this is important is because there's a lot of INTPs that are leftist utopians, and what they don't understand is they don't have a grasp on the basics and the foundations, and that's why they're leftist. When an INTP learns the actual basics of society, then they can advance knowledge of social well-being and the best system that can actually occur really easily and intuitively. But until they learn the basics, they're insane. They're just functionally insane ideologues. So you need the school of hard knocks for an INTP to be realistic, not pie in the sky, skyhook, sky crane, or something like that. But if they get the basics learned the hard way, then they can just automatically, like a snap of the fingers almost, it's like so easy for them, INTPs, to develop the advanced concepts and the perfect structure doing that. And that's a common argument for why INTPs need practical life experience forced onto them, because they won't do it automatically. Because an INTP naturally wants to use their conceptual frameworks to avoid hardship. Basically. But the only way they're going to learn the actual realities enough to develop the best system properly, the actual best system possible, is if they learn the hard way. And the reason why this is important is because INTPs are the most like that system. An INTP can develop a really cracked, bad worldview that's insane, but logically consistent in some way, enough for them to function, but be unhealthy for other people. Or a system that's unhealthy for many people, but is alluring to people. Whereas an INTP with the school of hard knocks and real life experience and practical experience and hard lessons learned the hard way, is actually good for them and is more logically coherent and consistent and so on. Because reality has limitations, and those limitations inform our beliefs as INTPs. And INTPs naturally want logical coherence over getting the best system. Their first function is TI or introverted thinking or thinking internally, not experiencing reality. That's why they're potentially genius, but they're absent-minded, or they're insane while genius. And learning the nooks and crannies and all the little details and the peaks and valleys and the hills and the valleys and the details is the only way they're going to learn and apply their internal logic or internal thinking, introverted thinking, to the actual realities that exist. And then once you learn the actual details of the real system, then your internal logic, internal introverted thinking can process for the full picture brilliantly. Which is why an immature INTP is dangerous, but a mature INTP is like one of the wisest people ever. And part of the lesson is learning also what I said in this whole learning that you need to learn the hard way, the basics, before you think of the best possible solution. Learning that lesson is also part of what it means to gain wisdom as an INTP. And it doesn't come naturally if they can avoid it. They can come up with wild theories that make a lot of sense at first if they don't have the details on the ground. But like I said, we have limited frames of reference as humans, so no idea of ours is perfect. But an INTP can get the closest to perfect if they actually learn if they actually learn the real basics and details of a situation. Then an INTP can be the grandmaster, best thinker, best person to listen to ever, in some sense. But then there's the question of how do we, not every INTP is willing to make that journey, and some people aren't forced to because other people pick up the slack for them. So then the question is, how do we get INTPs to actually do this so that civilizational continuity can exist? And the answer is we teach them. And when an INTP gets it right, they can explain it probably easily to people who are near their IQ level, who are INTJ, ENTJ, or INFJ. And maybe ISTP, I think. And then those people can relate it to other people who are also action oriented to some extent in some ways and so on. And therefore, the INTP is the Merlin wizard in the tower doing alchemy and experiments and doing the pure sciences, where others are applied scientists, and then like down below them is engineers, and then down below them is structural project managers, and then down below them is like the actual workers, like the laborers, like the people banging the nails with the hammers. That's the structure of the mental framework or the mental mapping of the universe that is appropriate, but you need humility and focus on details that exist in reality that aren't automatically picked up by the INTP for that to be a valid system. Otherwise, the INTP is just daydreaming, in other words. And basically, to tie back to the original point I was trying to make earlier, that's why INTPs are so good, because they resolve paradoxes the most. But they need to understand they're not God, they're not infinite, so there will always be paradoxes in their thinking. And because of that, utopia is impossible. No matter how much of a philosopher king you have who's the best man ever. Now, it's not hopeless. You can have a good system. You have to just accept there will be paradoxes on some level. But you don't want to rest on just saying, oh, there's paradoxes and they're in any system, so I'm going to just be lazy and not pick the best system. Especially as an INTP. For anyone, really. Although some other types of Myers-Briggs type indicator or MBTI can get away with it a little better because they're more naturally attuned to what's actually functional in their life. They're more naturally attuned towards humility and curiosity in regards to the details of the world. So they're less prone to the problems of pride making you insane than the INTP is in some sense, because they can get away with it less with their internal mapping and coherence of worldview and so on, internally logically, but not actually relevant to the details. Like an ISTJ or an ESTJ, right? They're not going to look at the internal consistency of their worldview and say, okay, well, the details don't match up, therefore the details are wrong. The INTP might actually do that, though. But they might say, for instance, that the details don't quite match up, but it's good enough. Most of the details match up, which is why the INTP is so good when they're good, but the others are better when the INTP is not as good as what they could be potentially for the details and concept relationship. Yeah. Okay, this is actually a long video. I lied, I guess, but I had a lot to say. The bit about paradoxes existing in any given situation because of limitation is anti-utopianism and anti-leftism in some sense, which is why the right is correct objectively in its politics compared to the left, and why Christianity is superior to all the third world religions and cultures and worldviews. But it's also why anyone can explain paradoxes and internal contradictions of any given system if they look hard enough. So, whataboutism on its own is not valid. Pointing out contradictions or paradoxes is not sufficient alone when you're doing it on one system. You have to compare systems, honestly. And for that you need curiosity. And for that you need humility. And you can't be too impressed with your own big brain. So when I was bragging that I have a 130 to 140 IQ and I'm an INTP, I'm not taking it to mean automatically I'm right. I'm just advertising what I actually have, and then I'm using this to explain why it's not enough, at least on its own. But the reason why I believe I'm correct is because I've had a lot of the school of hard knocks. So I've had to strip away anything that is conceptually flaky that doesn't match the on-the-ground system or reality for a lot of things. Not perfectly, obviously, but a lot of things. So this is good advice for INTPs, but also for other people. Now, one might argue because I'm supposedly schizo that I don't have a good grasp on reality. But this isn't schizophrenic logic. Actually, that's actually a good explanation. A schizophrenic is someone who's logical, but not rational. They have an internal experience, or their experience is the details of their experience are wrong in relation to common reality, so their internal logic is fallacious or has fallacies. That's what a schizophrenic is. And an INTP is very close to a schizophrenic in that way when they when they're not curious about the world and investigate it in the details. That's kind of the best way to describe it in a sense. Now, schizophrenic is seriously misguided because of their hard experiences being misleading, but an INTP glosses over details that they could otherwise pay attention to. So it's not literally the same thing. However, even if I'm schizo and INTP, one of the things you learn with internal logic and the school of hard knocks is when you mature, even with a little bit of delusional thinking, you can begin to pick up on the nature of delusion itself and figuring how that works. And then you're really cooking for Grandmaster of the Mind status as an INTP, where you're picking apart the nature of insanity and deconstructing it, so you have the ability to construct a new framework to encompass the initial insanity and incorporate insanity's existence into a new form of growing beyond the initial insanity into more wisdom in some sense. So all experience is grist for the mill with a mature INTP to really pick apart reality, to put it back together conceptually so they can explain it to other people properly and accurately, even with an initial throwing you off course from schizo experience. So you begin to understand what's real even when your experience is a little spotty. That is one thing INTPs can in fact do, because all experience is grist for the mill, and they're very meta. And that's basically the reason why I'm reasonable and stable relatively, while also being schizo as an INTP. My joke, it's a half joke, is as a mature INTP, I'm schizo, but at least I'm not insane like I was when I was an immature INTP. Anyways, I'll leave it there. It's been going on a long while. I do tend to rant and ramble. But if you listen, then you understand kind of the parameters and like the details and like the reason why things work the way they do and so on. It's a grab bag of concepts, but I guess it all centers on my experiences and relations and like my past and present and like my thoughts in working on concepts and frameworks and like picking up on details and learning how to learn and learning and thinking how to think and learning how to think and thinking how to learn. And yeah. So a mature INTP who's schizo, I'm guaranteeing you, is actually more sane and intelligent than an immature INTP who's not schizo. But an INTP with details, who's curious and learns the details, is more sane even when schizo in some ways than the average person might be. Or actually not quite. They're not quite as sane. But they do have a lot more knowledge that's real than the average person. But they don't have the wisdom to act on it. And that's why they can teach, because they're very conceptual, but they're not action-oriented in their focus or mindset. That's one of the crucial weaknesses of an INTP. Action orientation, executive function, which coincidentally is one of the things schizophrenia hits pretty hard in people a lot of the time, which is why they go to shit. I don't know for sure, but I'm wondering if INTPs have an increased rate of schizophrenia. Or maybe if INTPs have an increased resilience when schizophrenic, or both, more schizophrenic more often, but also more resilient when schizophrenic than average. I gotta look that up, but that's actually something I thought of. It might be true, it might not be, but it's just something I picked up on maybe. Also, INTPs do tend to be higher IQ, so it's not just like it's like book smarts, not like street smarts. But that it all ties together, sort of, you know. So, yeah. I guess this is just a grab bag of relations as an INTP and my thoughts on the whole nature reality in some sense.